My name is Millie Pickett, a 32-year-old captain in the United States Army. In the military, they teach us about honor, courage, and commitment. But they never teach you what to do when the worst battlefield is your own backyard. It was a crisp October evening in Wisconsin, at my own welcome home party after a deployment. The air should have smelled like grilled brats and reunion, but to me, it was thick with the stench of phoniness. My father, David, clapped my brother, Mark, on the shoulder and declared to our relatives, "This is my son, a man who builds empires with his own two hands." My mother, Carol, gave me a look of pity and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "If only little Millie could do something meaningful besides taking orders from other people." But the final gut punch came from Mark himself. He smirked. "Come on, sis, that government paycheck of yours is just fun money. Don't act like you're important." They didn't know that while they were celebrating themselves on the back of my sacrifice, an email from the bank was waiting on my phone. An email that was about to level their entire empire. If you've ever given everything to your family only to be treated with contempt, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this is the story of taking back my own honor. The scene was so perfectly, painfully Wisconsin that it felt like a postcard. Crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks, carrying the smoky, savory scent of bratwursts sizzling on the grill. Maple leaves, the color of fire and rust, blanketed the lawn of my childhood home. Laughter, loud and forced, echoed across the backyard. But as I stood there in my civilian clothes, which felt more foreign than my uniform ever had, I was an island. An intruder at my own party. Everyone was gathered around my brother, Mark. He was holding court, flashing a new Rolex that was just a little too yellow, a little too shiny, to be real. I knew it was a fake, just like the real estate empire he claimed to be building. My mother, Carol, drifted past me, her eyes barely making contact. "Oh, you're here," she said, her voice flat, as if she were acknowledging a piece of furniture. "Get yourself a plate of potato salad." Then, without waiting for a response, she turned back to her golden boy, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The indifference was a physical blow, sharper and more painful than a slap. In that moment, I wasn't Captain Millie Pickett, back from a grueling tour. I was just an obstacle, a shadow dimming the light shining on her perfect sun. The initial assault was subtle, a series of calculated paper cuts. My father, David, cleared his throat, tapping a beer bottle with his ring to get everyone's attention. He launched into a toast, his voice swelling with pride. "I want to talk about the American entrepreneurial spirit," he boomed, gesturing toward Mark. "The spirit of a man who isn't afraid of risk, a man who builds his own future." He paused, and his eyes slid over to me, a glint of something cold in them. "Of course," he continued, his voice dripping with implication, "not everyone has that kind of courage. Some people choose the safer path, a life of being told what to do." The words were like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin. Safer? I had spent the last year in places where the very air vibrated with danger, places he couldn't even find on a map. I had made life or death decisions while he was deciding which brand of fertilizer to use on the lawn. But here, in this yard, my courage was redefined as cowardice. My commitment, my service, was nothing more than a safe bet for a government paycheck. Then came the direct, brutal barrage, the one they had clearly rehearsed. My Aunt Susan, trying to be polite, asked me a simple question. "So, Millie, what's it like over there? What exactly is it you do?" Before I could even form a sentence, my father cut in with a loud, braying laugh. Her job is to jump when someone says, 'Jump.'" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, quickly swelling into a wave of shared amusement at my expense. I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot, suffocating tide of shame. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were turning my entire identity, the honor I had worked so hard to build, into a cheap punchline. I looked at my mother, searching for a lifeline, for any sign of defense. Instead, I saw a small, tight smile of satisfaction playing on her lips. She wasn't just complicit, she was enjoying this. She was savoring my humiliation. As if on cue, Pastor John, a longtime family friend with a perpetually pious expression, ambled over. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his touch feeling more like a restraint than a comfort. "Millie," he said, his voice a low, condescending hum. "The Lord teaches us to be humble. You should be happy for your brother's success. A rising tide lifts all boats, you know." He delivered the line as if he were bestowing a profound piece of wisdom, but all I heard was the sound of a nail being hammered into my coffin. He was using God to justify their cruelty, wrapping their jealousy and contempt in a holy cloth to make it righteous. The final blow came from my father. Perhaps he saw the defiance hardening in my eyes, the way my posture straightened into military rigidity. He took a step toward me, his face red with beer and anger. "Get out of here, Sergeant," he snarled, spitting my rank like it was a curse. "Nobody wants you here." That was it. The final thread holding me to this place, to this identity as their daughter, snapped. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My training, years of it, took over. It was a response so ingrained in me that it bypassed emotion entirely. My spine went ramrod straight. My chin lifted. I gave him a single sharp nod, the same way I would acknowledge an order from a superior officer. Then I turned on my heel and walked away. The silence I left in my wake was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. The laughter died. The chatter stopped. I could feel every eye on my back as I walked, with measured steps, toward the gate. As I passed the dessert table, my gaze caught on the centerpiece, a sheet cake with "Welcome Home, Millie," written in cheerful blue frosting. Plunged directly through the center of my name was the cake knife, left there by Mark after he'd carved himself a piece. The frosting was smeared, the words torn apart in a single, violent gash. It was the perfect metaphor for the evening. A welcome that was never real, now utterly destroyed. I didn't look back. I got into my truck, turned the key, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the warm glow of the party behind. The cab of the truck was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the noise I had just escaped. As I drove into the Wisconsin night, the only light came from the passenger seat. It was my phone, screen lit up, displaying the notification of a single, unread email. An email that held the truth. An email that was about to become my declaration of war. I ended up in a 24-hour diner off the highway, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of stale coffee and regret. My truck was parked outside, a dark shape against the lonely glow of the streetlights. Inside, the world was quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. My coffee had gone cold in its thick ceramic mug, a bitter black pool I couldn't bring myself to drink. On the table, my phone screen was still lit, a harsh rectangle of light in the dimness, that unread email. It felt less like a message and more like a landmine I was afraid to touch. The screen's glow seemed to pull me back through time, back to the first crack in the foundation of my world. I was 16. Mark was 19. Already a master of charming his way into trouble. He'd lost his entire community college tuition, money my parents had scraped together, in a poker game that went bad. I remember the tense silence in the living room when he confessed. My father's face was a mask of thunder. But his anger wasn't just for Mark, it was for the problem Mark had created, a problem that needed a solution. And the solution, as always, was me. They brought out the piggy bank. It was a heavy ceramic thing I'd had since I was a little girl, and it was nearly full. For 5 years, I'd put every dollar from babysitting and my part-time job at the grocery store into that pig. I was saving up for a real camera, a Canon Rebel, my first big dream. "Family helps family, Millie," my father said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He handed me a hammer. Tears streamed down my face as I stood over it. It felt like I was about to execute a friend. "But Dad, this is mine," I whispered. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be selfish," she chided, her voice sharp. "It's for your brother. Your money is family money anyway." With a sob, I brought the hammer down. The ceramic shattered, and years of carefully saved bills and coins spilled across the floor. It wasn't just a piggy bank that broke that day. It was the idea that anything I worked for, anything I earned could ever truly be my own. That was my first lesson in duty. My purpose was to be the emergency fund for my brother's mistakes. The lessons just got harder from there. The year before, Mark had wrecked his pickup truck trying to impress some girl. The repair bill was steep. It was also the week of my junior prom. I had found the perfect dress, a simple, elegant navy blue gown that made me feel, for the first time, beautiful. It was on layaway, and I just needed one more paycheck to get it. But Mark needed the money for his truck. A girl doesn't need a fancy dress, my mother had told me, taking the cash I'd laid out on my bed. What's important is your brother's future. He needs his truck for his new landscaping business. I went to the prom in a dress I borrowed from a friend. It didn't fit right. All night, I felt like an imposter, watching Mark laugh with his friends, completely oblivious to the small sacrifice I'd made. To him, it wasn't even a sacrifice. It was just what was supposed to happen. But the sharpest memory, the one that still felt like an open wound, was from my senior year. I came home one afternoon, my heart pounding with a joy so pure it felt like it could lift me off the ground. In my hand was a thick envelope from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'd gotten in. A partial scholarship even. It was everything I had worked for. I burst into the kitchen, waving the letter. "Mom, I got in. I got into Madison." She took the letter, her eyes scanning it with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. She placed it on the counter, next to a stack of mail. "We don't have the money for things like that, Millie," she said, her tone casual, as if discussing the weather. "Mark needs a big chunk of cash for a down payment on his first investment property." My dream, my future, was dismissed in a single sentence. That night, I huddled at the top of the stairs, listening to them talk in the living room below. "It's better if she enlists," my father's low voice rumbled. "Steady paycheck, good discipline. She can help Mark out down the line." They hadn't just denied my dream. They had already repurposed my future. My life wasn't my own to build. It was a resource to be allocated to my brother. That was the moment I decided to join the Army. If I was going to live a life of service, I decided it would be for my country, not just for my brother's failing business ventures. I thought putting an ocean between us would change things. I was wrong. The draining just became long distance. I remember a call from Mark while I was deployed in Afghanistan. The connection was scratchy, his voice frantic and sobbing over the line. He was going bankrupt, he wailed. He was going to lose everything. I was sitting in a concrete bunker, the wail of an air raid siren still echoing in my ears. Fear was a constant companion, a metallic taste in the back of my throat. But his panic felt more immediate, so I did what I was trained to do. I fixed the problem. I went to the finance office and wired him almost all of my combat pay, the hazard bonus I had earned for literally putting my life on the line every single day. A week later, I was scrolling through Facebook on a precious sliver of satellite internet. And there it was, a photo posted by Mark's wife, Tara. The two of them were on a white sand beach, holding colorful drinks with little umbrellas in them. The location tag said, Cancun, Mexico. The caption read, "Celebrating a successful deal. We deserve this." The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. I was in a war zone, sleeping with a rifle by my side, and they were using my blood money to toast their success on a beach. That scar never healed. It just got deeper. If you've ever had a sacrifice you made for family thrown back in your face, hit that like button to show some support. And in the comments below, just type the word, "I see you." Sometimes just being seen is all we need. My mind flashed to one last memory. My grandmother, Mildred, a few years before she passed. She had pulled me aside at a family Christmas gathering, her hand, wrinkled and warm, gripping mine tightly. "Millie, honey," she'd whispered, her eyes sharp and clear, "don't you let them turn your heart into an ATM." I had dismissed it then, patting her hand and telling her not to worry. She was just old, I thought, and prone to melodrama. But now her words echoed in the silence of the diner, a prophecy I'd been too blind, too bound by a misplaced sense of loyalty, to hear. I had been warned, and I hadn't listened. My gaze fell back to the phone on the table. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The past was a map, and every road led right here, to this moment, to this email. I was done running from the ghosts. I was done being their safety net. With a deep breath, I swiped the screen and opened the email from the bank. It was time to face the truth. The motel room was cheap, the kind that smells permanently of pine-scented cleaner and desperation. A single, weak lamp cast long shadows across the worn-out carpet. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the glow of my phone screen painting my face in a cold, blue light. The email was open, its black and white text stark and unforgiving. The subject line was simple: personal loan notification. My eyes scanned the numbers again, hoping I had misread them. But they didn't change. A loan for $60,000 taken out in my name 3 months ago. My signature, a clumsy forged imitation of my own handwriting, was on the attached document. My heart didn't race. It just stopped. A heavy, dead weight in my chest. This wasn't just ingratitude anymore. This wasn't just taking advantage of my goodwill. This was a calculated crime. This was forgery. This was identity theft. This was the kind of betrayal that could detonate my entire career, vaporize the security clearance I had bled and sacrificed for. An icy chill crept up my spine, so cold it felt like it was freezing my bones. It wasn't the chill of fear. It was the chilling clarity of seeing my family for exactly who they were. Not flawed, not difficult, but predators. And I had been their prey. I must have fallen into a restless, dreamless sleep, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the thin, grimy curtains. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text. The first shot in their coordinated psychological assault had been fired. It was from my father. The message read, "You have shamed this entire family. Where is the loyalty they teach you soldiers? Or does the army only teach you how to turn your back on your own blood?" I stared at the words, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He was using my own values, the very core of my identity, as a weapon against me. He was twisting loyalty to mean blind submission to their corruption. My fingers hadn't even finished tightening around the phone when it buzzed again. This time, it was a call from my mother. Her approach was different, softer, more insidious. "Millie, honey," she cooed, her voice thick with fake concern. "I know you're upset, but Mark, he's just struggling right now. You leaving like that has him so distraught. Please come home, sweetie. Family forgives." It was a classic textbook maneuver, one we studied in interrogation training. Good cop, bad cop, the carrot and the stick. My father threatened, my mother soothed. But the objective was the same: to break me down, to make me doubt my own reality, to force me back into my designated role. The obedient daughter. The family ATM. But the most public, most venomous attack was yet to come. It came from Mark, and he launched it on the one battlefield where everyone in our small Wisconsin town could see it. Facebook. He posted a picture of us as kids. I was about 7, he was 10. We were grinning, missing teeth, sitting on the front porch swing. It was a photo I had always loved. But the caption he wrote underneath it turned that innocent memory into something toxic. "Always love my little sister, even when she loses her way sometimes," he wrote. "It's sad when your success becomes poison to other people, even your own family. Hoping she finds herself again soon." I watched in real time as the comments rolled in, a tidal wave of public judgment. "What a shame. She should be proud of you. Stay strong, Mark. We're all behind you. I can't believe Millie would be so selfish, after all her parents have done for her." I felt exposed, as if I had been stripped naked and put on trial in the town square. In the space of a few sentences, Mark had masterfully painted himself as the successful, loving brother, and me as the unstable, jealous, vindictive sister. He had created a narrative, a lie built on the foundation of the very money he had stolen from me, and our entire community was buying it. I was now the villain in my own story. The final blow, the one that confirmed my absolute isolation, came from a trusted source. My Aunt Susan, my dad's sister, the one who always sent me care packages overseas, the one who called me her hero. Her name flashed on my screen, and for a foolish second, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe she was calling to check on me. Maybe she saw through the lies. I was wrong. "Millie," she said, her voice a syrupy mix of sweetness and steel. "I heard what happened. I know you've sacrificed a lot, dear. But what's money compared to family? How could you upset your parents like this? You're tearing everyone apart over a little bit of pride." A little bit of pride. $60,000 of fraud was a little bit of pride. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just quietly said, "I have to go, Aunt Susan," and ended the call. My hand was trembling as I set the phone down. That was the moment I understood. My family wasn't a unit with a few broken parts. It was an alliance, a system meticulously constructed to protect its most valuable asset, Mark, at any cost. And I was the designated cost. My future, my finances, and now my reputation were all acceptable collateral damage in the mission to prop up my brother. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the anonymous parking lot. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to call them, to scream, to cry, to make them understand. But then, my training kicked in once more. When you're under ambush, you don't charge blindly into the line of fire. You find cover. You assess the situation. You stop all communications until you know the enemy's position. I picked up my phone, my movements now calm and deliberate. I silenced the notifications. Then, with a final, decisive tap, I powered it off completely. The screen went black, plunging the room into a dim, quiet stillness. Radio silence. That was the first protocol. The battle had been declared, and the first step was to take myself off their grid. For 2 days, I existed in a self-imposed exile of silence and cheap motel rooms. The radio silence was a necessary tactic, giving me the space to let the initial shockwaves of the attack subside. But isolation is a dangerous strategy if held for too long. By the third morning, the quiet had started to feel less like a shield and more like a cage. I knew I couldn't face this alone. There was only one person on the planet I could trust to understand, not just the family betrayal, but the military precision behind it. I drove for an hour, heading west through the rolling hills of Wisconsin, until I reached the small town Sarah Jenkins now called home. I pulled over on a quiet side street, my hands tight on the steering wheel, and made the call. My voice came out as a ragged whisper, hoarse from disuse. "Sarah," I said, the name itself a lifeline. "I need you." There was no hesitation on the other end. No questions, no demands for an explanation. Just the calm, steady voice of a fellow soldier. "Meet me at the daily grind in 10. I'm on my way." The click of the line ending was the most reassuring sound I had heard in days. That immediate, unquestioning response, it was the bedrock of military camaraderie. It was the unspoken promise that when one of you goes down, the other is already moving to cover you. It was everything family was supposed to be. The Daily Grind was a small, cozy coffee shop just a few blocks from the High Ground Veterans Memorial Park. The air inside smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon, a warm, comforting blanket against the chill I felt in my bones. I chose a secluded booth in the back corner, neating the wall behind me. As I drove into town, I'd passed the entrance to the memorial, the silhouettes of its statues stark against the gray sky. It was a place of quiet dignity, a testament to real sacrifice and unwavering loyalty. A world away from the mockery my family had made of those same values. Sarah slid into the booth opposite me, just as the waitress set down a mug of black coffee I hadn't ordered. She knew. Of course she knew. Sarah, a former Army logistics officer, had a face that was all sharp angles and sharper intelligence, softened only by the deep empathy in her eyes. I didn't know where to begin, so I just started talking. The words tumbled out of me in a messy, broken stream. The party, the toast, my father's sneering dismissal, my mother's satisfied smile, the hacked-up cake. Then I unlocked my phone and pushed it across the table. "And then this," I said, my voice finally cracking. She read everything. The email about the $60,000 loan. The barrage of texts from my parents. She scrolled through Mark's Facebook post, her jaw tightening with every comment she read. I watched her face, which hardened from concern into a cold, controlled fury. When I finally finished, the dam inside me broke. The discipline, the composure I'd maintained since that night, it all just shattered. Hot, shameful tears streamed down my face. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, but here, in this safe harbor, I couldn't stop. Sarah didn't say a word. She didn't offer empty platitudes like, "It's going to be okay," or "They didn't mean it." She just reached across the table, pushed a box of napkins toward me, and waited. Her silence was a gift. It was a quiet space for my grief to exist without judgment, an acknowledgement that this pain was real and deserved to be felt. It was worth more than 1,000 well-meaning but useless words. When the tears finally subsided into ragged breaths, she met my gaze. Her eyes were like steel. "They drew first blood, Millie," she said, her voice low and firm. "They declared war, not you." The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. It wasn't advice, it was a tactical assessment, and it was liberating. In that single sentence, she dismantled the architecture of guilt my family had spent a lifetime building. I wasn't the one tearing the family apart. I wasn't being selfish or prideful. I was a soldier, on her own soil, defending against an unprovoked attack. I was the one under siege. Sarah took a sip of her own coffee, and I saw the shift happen. The friend became the officer. The strategist took over. "All right, Captain Pickett," she said, a faint wry smile touching her lips. It was the first time I'd smiled in days. "Let's do a situation report. The enemy has revealed their position and their tactics. We're looking at psychological warfare and a financial flanking maneuver. Their objective is to force your unconditional surrender. So, what's our counteroffensive?" Hearing her frame it that way, like a mission briefing, was like a bucket of ice water to my chaotic emotions. The panic receded, replaced by the cool, familiar focus of a soldier. She had given me back my footing. She had taken the tangled mess of hurt and betrayal and laid it out on a map. "First," I started, my voice clearer now. "I need to protect my career. This loan—" "Exactly," Sarah cut in, her eyes narrowing. "That loan could compromise your security clearance. This isn't just about money. It's about your entire life's work. You have to report it. But first, we need more intelligence." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Have you spoken to your grandmother, Mildred?" The idea sparked in my mind like a flint hitting steel. Grandma Mildred, the quiet observer. The one person in the family who saw everything but rarely spoke. Her silence a different kind than mine. One of wisdom, not of pain. "No," I said, a new energy surging through me. "Not yet." "Call her," Sarah instructed. "She's our inside source. And Millie," she added, her tone becoming even more serious. "Run a full credit report on yourself. All 3 bureaus, now. That is standard operating procedure. We need a full battle damage assessment. We need to know the extent of the breach." I looked at Sarah, at her calm, determined face, and I felt the ground solidify beneath my feet for the first time in days. Her advice wasn't just comforting, it was tactical. It was actionable. She hadn't just given me a shoulder to cry on, she had handed me a weapon and a plan. I finally had a command post. I had an ally. And now, I had my next set of orders. Back in the sterile silence of my motel room, I executed the first step of Sarah's plan. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed my grandmother Mildred's number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice frail but clear, as if she'd been sitting by the phone. "Millie," she said, and there was a world of weary knowledge in that single word. "I've been waiting for your call." I didn't even have to ask. The truth, long suppressed by family secrets, came spilling out. "It's gambling debts, child," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Online poker. Your brother is in so deep, deeper than any of us knew. Your parents, they already sold your father's new pickup truck to cover some of it, but it wasn't even close to enough." She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "But there's something else you need to know. A few weeks ago, I overheard Mark talking to your mother in the kitchen. He was panicking about a payment. Your mother was trying to calm him down. My grandmother's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, mimicking the conversation she'd overheard. Mark's voice, she said, was slick with a chilling confidence. Don't worry, Mom. Millie's a straight arrow, but she'll never sue her own family. Her stupid loyalty is her biggest weakness. The words landed like a physical strike. A cold, sharp anger, unlike anything I had ever felt, pierced through the layers of my grief. It wasn't just that they had exploited my loyalty. It was that they had identified it, named it, and despised it. They saw my best quality as a pathetic, predictable flaw, a tool to be used against me. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my honor and mocked it. Immediately after hanging up, I followed Sarah's second directive. My laptop was open, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I logged into the credit reporting agency's website. My stomach was in knots. The screen loaded and a string of accounts appeared under my name. My breath caught in my throat. It was so much worse than I thought. It wasn't just the $60,000 personal loan. In the last 6 months, 3 new credit cards had been opened in my name. A Visa, a MasterCard, and American Express. All of them were maxed out. Small charges at first, gas stations, restaurants, then bigger ones. A $5,000 charge at a home improvement store. A $7,000 charge from a luxury resort in Florida. All told, the debt amounted to just over $85,000. And the mailing address for every single account, every statement, was my parents' house. This wasn't a single act of desperation. This was a system. A sophisticated, well-planned operation designed to bleed me dry in secret, all while they smiled in my face and talked about family. Then I saw it. A detail so cruel, so needlessly vicious, that it sucked the air from my lungs. I scrolled back to the personal loan, the big one. I looked at the date of origination. October 14th. The 10-year anniversary of the day I took my oath of enlistment. They had celebrated the day I dedicated my life to my country by committing a felony against me. They had marked my decade of service by strapping a concrete block of debt to my back. The sheer, calculated heartlessness of it was staggering. Any remaining flicker of sentiment I had for them, any lingering doubt, was extinguished in that moment. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The emotional part of the mission was over. Now, it was about logistics. With the methodical calm of an intelligence analyst, I began gathering my evidence. I started making calls. First to the bank that issued the loan, then to each of the 3 credit card companies. My voice was steady, professional, leaving no room for doubt. My name is Captain Millie Pickett, I stated to each customer service representative. My serial number is, I am calling because I have reason to believe I'm a victim of systematic identity theft. Using my rank wasn't a power trip, it was a strategic tool. It immediately elevated the seriousness of the call. I was no longer just a disgruntled customer, I was a federal officer reporting a crime, and it worked. The tone on the other end of the line shifted from bored indifference to serious cooperation. Yes, Captain. Of course, Captain. We will investigate this immediately, Captain. I requested digital copies of every application, every signature card, every piece of documentation associated with the fraudulent accounts. Within hours, my email inbox began to fill up with PDFs. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. My forged signature, clumsier on each new application. The online IP address for the credit card signups traced directly back to Mark's home internet service. It was all there, laid out in digital black and white. That evening, I turned my motel room into a command center. I printed everything out, the loan agreement, the credit card statements, the screenshots of Mark's Facebook post, and the sycophantic comments beneath it. My handwritten notes from the call with my grandmother. I spread the documents across the floor, arranging them like pieces of a battlefield map, identifying enemy positions and lines of attack. Each piece of paper was a round of ammunition. Each piece of evidence was a plate of body armor. My eyes fell on a book I had brought with me on deployment, now sitting on the nightstand. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. It was a staple among military leaders. I picked it up, its familiar weight grounding me. The core principle of the book was simple. A true leader takes absolute responsibility for everything in their world. No excuses, no blaming others. For years, I had blamed them for my pain. But I had to own my part. I had owned my silence. I had owned my blind loyalty. I had allowed my love for my family to become a liability that they had exploited without mercy. I took out a fresh manila folder and began arranging the documents inside, labeling each one with a sticky note. This was my mission file. I had owned my past weakness. Now, I would own this counteroffensive. I was no longer a panicked victim. I was Captain Millie Pickett, and I was preparing for the most important mission of my life. The drive to my parents' house was the calmest I had felt in days. The panic was gone, the grief was gone, replaced by the cold, clear focus of a soldier heading into an engagement. In the passenger seat next to me sat the manila folder, my mission file. It felt heavier than any rucksack I had ever carried. I pulled up to the curb in front of the house I grew up in. It looked exactly the same, the neatly trimmed lawn, the cheerful yellow shutters, but to me, it was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. I didn't knock. I walked straight in, the front door clicking shut behind me with a sound of finality. They were in the living room, exactly as I knew they would be. The television was blaring, the familiar drone of a Green Bay Packers game filling the air. It was a perfect picture of suburban tranquility, a lie painted over a foundation of deceit. My father, David, was slouched in his recliner, a can of beer sweating in his hand. Mark was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. My mother, Carol, was arranging coasters on the end tables. They were completely at ease, secure in their little kingdom, utterly oblivious to the storm that had just walked through their door. My father's head snapped up. His face already flushed from the game and the beer, darkened with irritation. "What the hell are you doing back here?" he grumbled. Mark looked up from his phone and let out a low, mocking chuckle. My mother just sighed, a long, theatrical sound of pure annoyance. They still thought they held all the power. They still saw me as the disobedient child, the inconvenient problem. I said nothing. I walked directly to the coffee table that sat between them, a silent predator entering their den. I picked up the remote and pressed the power button. The roar of the crowd and the frantic voice of the announcer were abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing silence. With a deliberate, unhurried movement, I placed the manila folder on the table. The sound it made, a sharp, authoritative slap against the wood, made all three of them flinch. I flipped open the cover to the first page, a clean copy of the $60,000 loan application with my forged signature circled in red ink. I looked at my father. "Explain," I said. My voice was level, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice I used to give orders. He tried to bluster his way through it, puffing out his chest. "This is a family matter. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand." I didn't argue. I simply turned the page. The next documents were the credit card statements, a litany of their greed. I tapped a finger on a line item. "Is this also a family matter?" I asked, my voice as cold as ice. "This $5,000 charge for your new motorcycle, Mark? Or this, Mom? A week-long trip to a resort in Florida?" I saw the first flicker of panic in their eyes. The color drained from my mother's face. Mark's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting toward our father for support. "I was just borrowing it. I was going to pay you back." A humorless smile touched my lips. "Borrow?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air like a foul smell. "You call forging my signature, running up nearly $100,000 of debt in my name, and threatening to destroy my entire military career, borrowing?" I saw my father open his mouth to interrupt, to try and regain control with another bellow of authority, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the ace up my sleeve. "I have one more piece of evidence for you," I said, my eyes locked on Mark and my mother. I pressed play. A recorded voice, tinny and distorted but unmistakably Mark's, filled the dead air of the room. It was from my grandmother's call. and she had given me her full permission to use it. "Don't worry, Mom," the recording of Mark said, his voice slick and condescending. "Millie's a straight arrow, but she'll never sue her own family. Her stupid loyalty is her biggest weakness." The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. There were no more lies to hide behind, no more narratives to spin. They were exposed, stripped bare by their own words. My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Mark looked like he had been physically struck, his face pale and clammy. And then, right on cue, the waterworks started. My mother's face crumpled and she began to sob, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "I only did it to help your brother," she cried, her voice choked with manufactured despair. "I've sacrificed my whole life for you children." It was her final, most potent weapon, guilt. But the soldier in me was immune. I raised my hand, a sharp, silencing gesture that cut her off mid-sob. "Enough," I commanded. My voice was steel. The time for emotion was over. "My service to this family unit is officially concluded." I looked at each of them, one by one, making sure they understood that the chain of command had permanently changed. "I will be reporting this identity theft to the military police and the credit bureaus. My career, the one you so carelessly endangered, will be protected. The honor you tried to turn into a joke will be restored." I let the weight of those words sink in before delivering the final orders. "From this moment forward, you are all ghosts to me. Do not call, do not text, do not reach out in any way. This is your final disbursement. You are, to me, honorably discharged." If you have ever had to make the gut-wrenching decision to cut ties with a toxic family member for your own survival, please hit that like button. And in the comments, just write the words "boundary set." It's a salute to everyone who has had the courage to draw that line. I turned my back on them. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. As I walked toward the door, I could hear my mother's wailing intensify, my father starting to shout my name. But I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I walked out of that house and into the clean, cold air, leaving behind the smoking ruins of an empire built on lies. The battle was over. And I had won. Walking out of my parents' house was a declaration of war. But declarations are just words. To win a war, you need strategy, you need assets, and you need firepower. My next move wasn't driven by anger, but by cold, hard logic. Following Sarah's recommendation, I made an appointment. The law firm was called Riley and Associates, Veterans Defending Veterans. The office wasn't fancy. There was no polished marble or expensive artwork. Instead, the space was clean, orderly, and disciplined. The American flag stood proudly in one corner, and the framed military service medals on the wall weren't for decoration. They were resumes. It felt less like a law office and more like a tactical operations center. Jessica Riley stood to greet me. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and the unmistakable posture of a career officer. She didn't offer me a handshake full of pity. She gave me a firm, professional grip that conveyed respect. "Captain Pickett," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "Please, have a seat." I placed the mission file on her large, uncluttered desk. Wordlessly, she opened it and began to read. She examined each page with a forensic intensity, her expression unreadable. She wasn't processing my pain. She was processing data. She took in the forged loan documents, the maxed-out credit card statements, the screenshots of Mark's Facebook smear campaign, and my notes from the call with my grandmother. When she finally looked up, her eyes were like polished steel. "Excellent work, Captain," she said, respectfully correcting the rank my father had used as an insult. "You've conducted a thorough intelligence-gathering operation. Now, let's plan the engagement." She turned in her chair and gestured to a large whiteboard on the wall. She uncapped a black marker and, with swift, efficient strokes, began to outline a plan of attack. "We will proceed with a three-pronged strategy," she announced, her voice crisp. She drew 3 arrows on the board. Prong 1, defensive maneuvers. She wrote the words in clean block letters. First thing tomorrow, we file official identity theft reports with all three major credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. We put a freeze on your credit. Simultaneously, I will contact the Criminal Investigation Division, the CID. We need to get ahead of this to protect your security clearance. We are building a firewall around your career, effective immediately. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tense, began to relax. Prong 2. The counter-offensive. She drew the second arrow. I will draft a formal demand letter to be delivered to your parents and your brother. It will state the facts of the case in no uncertain terms. It will demand full acknowledgement of the fraud and a comprehensive repayment plan for the $85,000 to be initiated within 30 days. If they fail to comply, they will be facing a civil lawsuit that will expose every detail of this in a public court. She paused, capping the marker. We are giving them one chance to surrender with a shred of dignity, she explained, her eyes meeting mine. But we are fully prepared for a protracted conflict. And prong 3? I asked. A grim smile touched her lips as she drew the final arrow. Reserve firepower. If they refuse to cooperate, the civil suit is just the beginning. We will take this entire file to the district attorney's office and push for criminal prosecution. Forgery, wire fraud, identity theft. These are felonies, Captain. We have them dead to rights. As I sat there, watching her lay out the strategy, I felt a profound sense of relief. The immense, crushing weight I had been carrying alone was suddenly shared. It was no longer just my fight. I had a commanding officer. During our consultation, she paused and asked me a question that was as direct as a bullet. Captain, this pattern of financial abuse seems to have been going on for years. Why did you wait until now to act? The question wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry. It forced me to look inward, to face the uncomfortable truth. I took a breath. Because, ma'am, I answered, my voice quiet but steady. For my entire life, I confused loyalty with blindness. It was a confession, an acknowledgement of my role in my own long-standing suffering. Admitting it out loud felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for it to finally heal. Jessica Riley nodded slowly, a deep understanding in her eyes. In the Army, we fight for our country, she said. In here, we fight for the truth. Your mission now is to protect yourself. Let me handle the rest. A few days later, her demand letter, delivered by certified mail, landed like a bomb in my parents' quiet suburban world. As expected, my father was the first to react. He called my phone, his number one I hadn't yet blocked. His voice wasn't booming this time. It was a low, menacing growl, laced with a desperate attempt at intimidation. Millie, do you have any idea what you're doing? You are destroying this family, he hissed. Do you know what this kind of stress will do to your mother? Do you really want to be the one who sends your own brother to prison? He was pulling the last arrow from his quiver. The guilt trip. He was trying to make this my fault, to make me the aggressor. But Ms. Riley had prepared me for this exact tactic. I didn't do this, Dad, I said calmly, my voice a flat line. You all did. I'm just cleaning up the mess. Any further communication will need to go through my lawyer. And I hung up. I felt the last chord of their psychological control snap. His weapon was useless now. Throughout this period of intense stress, my real unit, my chosen family, formed a protective circle around me. Sarah called me every single day, never asking for updates on the case, but always asking the same important question. How are you doing today, Mills? My grandmother Mildred, unable to visit, sent me a package. Inside was a tin of her famous homemade chocolate chip cookies and a small handwritten note on a piece of floral stationery. All it said was, I am so proud of you. I held that note in my hand, the simple words a more powerful validation than any medal I'd ever earned. These small acts of unwavering support were the fuel that kept me going. My unit was small, but it was fiercely loyal. I was a soldier in a new kind of war, but for the first time, I knew I wasn't fighting it alone. The 30 days stipulated in Jessica Riley's demand letter came and went with nothing but defiant silence from my family. As Ms. Riley had predicted, they were banking on the hope that I wouldn't go through with it. They were wrong. The next step was mediation, a final chance to resolve this before it became a full-blown public lawsuit. The mediation took place in a sterile conference room in a neutral office building downtown. The air was thick with a tension you could almost taste. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Ms. Riley and me. We were calm, organized, our copies of the mission file stacked neatly in front of us. On the other side sat David, Carol, and Mark. They looked agitated, shifting uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. Next to them sat their lawyer, a man named Henderson. He was an older, small-town attorney who looked like he was more accustomed to handling property disputes than federal felonies. He exuded a misplaced, folksy confidence, as if he could smooth this all over with a few well-worn platitudes. He was completely out of his depth, and he didn't even know it yet. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began, his voice oozing a patronizing charm. "Well," he started, beaming at us. "I'm glad we could all come together today. Family is the most important thing we have, and sometimes wires get crossed. There are misunderstandings. I'm confident we can resolve this little disagreement and get the Pickett family back on the right track." Ms. Riley let him finish, her face a perfect, unreadable mask of professional calm. She didn't even blink. When the room fell silent, she leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "We are not here to discuss family philosophy. We are here to address a case of financial fraud totaling $85,000. The color drained from Henderson's face. He tried to recover, shuffling through his papers. "Now, Jessica, let's not be hasty. My clients maintain that there was an informal, unspoken agreement. Captain Pickett has a history of generously supporting her family, and this was merely an extension of that." "An unspoken agreement," Ms. Riley interrupted, her voice dangerously soft. "An agreement to forge her signature on a federal loan document. An agreement to commit identity theft against an active duty officer, thereby jeopardizing her security clearance and, by extension, national security." She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. "Sir, what you call a family misunderstanding, the federal government calls a felony. Several, in fact." Henderson was starting to sweat. He tried another angle. "My client, Mark Pickett, was simply borrowing the funds." That was the opening Ms. Riley had been waiting for. This was the moment she would deploy her trump card. "Borrowing? That's an interesting choice of words," she said, turning her laptop to face them. "Perhaps this will clarify the nature of the borrowing." She clicked a file. A man's voice, amplified by the small speakers, filled the room. It was Mark, but not the stammering, nervous Mark sitting across from me. This was a cocky, boastful Mark talking to one of his gambling creditors. "Don't worry about the money. I'll get it," his recorded voice bragged. "My little sister in the Army, she's got a fat savings account, and she trusts me completely. It's like taking candy from a baby." The recording, which Sarah's friend in cybersecurity had legally recovered from a cloud server, was the kill shot. I watched Mark's face. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like a ghost. His jaw hung open, a silent gasp of disbelief. Mr. Henderson just stared at the laptop, his folksy confidence completely evaporated, leaving behind the stunned expression of a man who had just realized he'd brought a pocket knife to a gunfight. The wall of their denial crumbled into dust. With the recording as leverage, Ms. Riley began a surgical cross-examination, her questions sharp and relentless. "Mr. Pickett," she said to Mark, "is that your voice on the recording?" He could only nod, unable to speak. "Did you or did you not sign your sister's name on these loan and credit card applications?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room for an escape that wasn't there. "Yes," he whispered, the admission barely audible. She turned to my father. "Mr. Pickett, were you aware that your son had significant gambling debts when these fraudulent accounts were opened?" My father, the blustering patriarch, seemed to shrink in his chair. "I knew he was in some trouble," he mumbled, his voice a pathetic shadow of its usual roar. Then my mother did something predictable, yet shocking. In a final, desperate attempt to save her son, she threw herself on the grenade. "It was me," she cried, her voice cracking. "It was all my idea. I set it all up. Mark didn't want to do it. Don't blame him. I'm just an old, worried mother trying to help her son. It was a pathetic, transparent lie, a final act of manipulation. She hoped they wouldn't prosecute a weak old woman. But her confession only made it worse. It confirmed what we already knew. This wasn't just Mark's crime. It was an organized family conspiracy. The fight was over. Ms. Riley pushed a stack of papers to the center of the table. "These are our terms," she stated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "They are final." She laid them out, one by one. 1. The Pickett family would sell their home and any other necessary assets to repay the full $85,000 to Millie within 60 days. 2. Mark would sign a legally binding confession of guilt, detailing the fraud. 3. They would all sign a permanent, no-contact order, legally barring them from ever contacting Millie again. The alternative, Ms. Riley concluded, her voice as cold as a winter morning, is that this entire file, including that recording, goes directly to the district attorney's office and the CID. You will face a criminal trial. Faced with the undeniable threat of prison, their resistance shattered. Mr. Henderson, looking utterly defeated, could only advise them to sign. I watched, my heart a steady rhythmic drum in my chest, as they picked up the pen one by one. My father's hand trembled. Mark wouldn't look at me. My mother's tears were real now. Hot tears of defeat. Not of manipulation. They signed away their house. They signed away their power. They signed themselves out of my life forever. I didn't feel the triumphant joy I had expected. There was no elation, no explosive sense of victory. There was only a quiet, profound, and ice-cold relief. The mission was complete. The war was over. I had won. Victory isn't loud. It doesn't always come with a ticker-tape parade or a triumphant soundtrack. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of an email notification on a Tuesday morning. Exactly 58 days after the mediation, my phone chimed. It was an alert from my bank. A deposit had been made into my account. The number was $85,000. I stared at the screen, not with a surge of joy, but with a heavy, profound sense of finality. It wasn't a prize, it was a reimbursement for damages. It was the closing entry in a ledger that had been unbalanced for far too long. The ripples of that day in the conference room spread slowly but surely through our small town. The first visible sign was the for sale sign that appeared on the front lawn of my childhood home, its bold red letters a public declaration of their defeat. Then, the whispers started. Mark's so-called real estate empire, a house of cards built on my credit and his lies, collapsed spectacularly when his other creditors, no longer held off by the promise of my money, came to collect. The local newspaper, the Wisconsin Valley Chronicle, ran a small article in the business section. It announced that Pickett Properties, LLC had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The article was short, professional, and devastating, laying bare the truth Mark had spent years trying to conceal. Justice, I learned, wasn't a clap of thunder. It was the quiet, inevitable consequence of a lifetime of bad choices. One afternoon, I found myself driving down my old street, almost on autopilot. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a sold banner. A new family was already moving in. A young couple, unloading boxes from a U-Haul, their kids chasing a ball on the lawn. I saw the sticker on the back of their minivan, an insignia for a unit at Fort McCoy. A young military family. And flying from the porch, where our tattered decorative flag used to hang, was a brand new, crisp American flag, waving proudly in the autumn breeze. It felt symbolic, like a changing of the guard. The house was no longer a monument to my pain. It was a home again, a place of new beginnings, not just for them, but for me. A week later, a letter arrived at my new apartment. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's, a familiar looping script that made my heart give a single, painful twinge. I opened it in my quiet, sunlit living room, a space that was entirely my own, a sanctuary I had fought for. The letter was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It was a symphony of self-pity and blame-shifting, with no single note of apology. She wrote of the humiliation of moving into a cramped two-bedroom rental apartment, of my father's bleak silence, of Mark's bad luck and broken spirit. She reminisced about my childhood, the time I fell off my bike, and she kissed my scraped knee, the Christmases spent by the fire. As if these curated memories could somehow erase the decades of calculated neglect and abuse. She ended the letter with a final, desperate plea wrapped in a cliché. "Family is forever, Millie," she wrote. "I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us." I read the words, and the Millie of the past would have dissolved into tears of guilt. But the Millie of today was different. I saw the letter for what it was, not an olive branch, but a lure. It was a desperate attempt to pull me back into the cycle of dysfunction. I saw the selfishness, the complete absence of genuine remorse, and I didn't feel anger. I just felt a profound, bottomless sadness for a relationship that was well and truly dead. I stood up, walked over to the small paper shredder in my home office, and fed the letter into the slot. The machine whirred to life, and I watched as her words, her carefully crafted guilt trip, were turned into meaningless, confetti-like strips. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't require reconciliation. Mark tried to reach out too. He left a voicemail, his voice stripped of all its usual arrogance, now thin and pleading. "Millie, sis, I'm sorry, okay? I was wrong. I messed up. But you can't just let me go down like this. I'm your brother. You're my sister." I listened to the message, my head tilted. And for the first time, I heard him clearly. It wasn't remorse in his voice. It was the raw terror of a parasite that had just been severed from its host. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was terrified of the consequences. I didn't call back. I simply opened my phone's settings, found their numbers, Mark, my father, my mother, and pressed block. The small confirmation pop-up on the screen felt like the sound of a cell door locking, setting me free. In the midst of these aftershocks, an unexpected light appeared. It was a text message from my cousin, Shane. He'd been a silent, peripheral figure at all those family gatherings, never participating in the ridicule but never stopping it either. His text was simple. "Millie, just read about Mark's bankruptcy. I wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up." We all knew what he was like, what was really going on, but nobody had the guts to say anything. "You were so brave. Just wanted you to know that." That message was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open. It was a quiet confirmation from inside the family wall that I wasn't crazy. My truth was the truth. That night, I was reading a book by the psychologist Brené Brown, and a sentence seemed to leap off the page and sear itself into my mind. "Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind." It resonated so deeply. For years, my family had operated in the fog of the unclear. Unspoken expectations, passive aggression, blurred boundaries. My decision to confront them, to hire a lawyer, to set a hard, unbreakable boundary. It felt harsh at the time. But I realize now it was the kindest thing I could have possibly done. It was kind to myself, because it gave me peace. And in a strange way, it was kind to them. It forced them finally to face the reality of their own actions, free from the fog of my stupid loyalty. It was a kindness they would never appreciate, but that didn't matter. It was the truth. 1 year later, I stood in the living room of my own apartment, watching the early morning sun stream through the large windows, casting golden patterns on the hardwood floor. The air was still, filled with the scent of brewing coffee and a profound, unshakable peace. It wasn't a large apartment, but it was mine. Bought with my own money, filled with my own furniture, and overflowing with a quiet that was earned, not given. There were no family photos on my walls. The smiling, posed images of the Picketts had been replaced by frames holding different kinds of memories. There was a picture of Sarah and me, laughing, covered in mud after a charity obstacle course. There were photos of my unit overseas, brothers and sisters in arms. A bond forged in dust and fire. There were snapshots from my travels, moments of beauty and solitude from around the world. My phone, resting on the kitchen counter, no longer felt like an explosive device. It no longer buzzed with angry accusations or wheedling demands. Now, it only chimed with texts from Sarah asking if I wanted to grab coffee, or updates from my army buddies. This was it. This was the life I had fought for. This was my new normal. The $85,000 sat in my bank account for a month, untouched. I couldn't bring myself to spend it. It felt tainted, a monument to my pain. So, I decided to do what soldiers do. I would turn the enemy's weapon into an asset for my own mission. I called Jessica Riley. Together, we drew up the paperwork to establish a small nonprofit foundation. We didn't name it after my family. We named it after the part of my identity they could never tarnish. We called it the Captain Pickett Honor Fund. Its mission was simple: to provide free, confidential financial literacy and legal consultations for young service members who were facing financial abuse from their own families. To launch the fund, I hosted a small gathering in a private room at a local restaurant. The only people there were my new unit: Sarah, Ms. Riley, my cousin Shane, and a few other veterans who had become my friends. There were no grand speeches, no pretensions. When I stood up to speak, my voice was thick with emotion, but it didn't waver. I learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous battlefield isn't overseas, I said, looking at the faces of the people who had stood by me. Sometimes it's in your own home, with your own family. This fund is for the soldiers fighting that silent war. It's to let them know that they are not alone, and that they are worthy of being defended. A few months after the launch, I received an email from a young Marine corporal named Emily. Her story was a haunting echo of my own. Her parents were draining her paychecks to fund her brother's latest failed startup, all while making her feel deeply guilty for wanting to say no. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the same one where Sarah had first helped me assemble my command post. Emily was barely 20, with a soldier's posture but the lost, worried eyes of a child. She told me her story in a low, halting voice, twisting a napkin in her hands. I didn't just listen, I understood. I saw my own reflection in her struggle, in her misplaced sense of duty. When she finished, I didn't offer her a list of instructions. I offered her a piece of my own hard-won truth. I told her my story, not with bitterness or anger, but with the calm perspective of a survivor who had mapped the terrain. "You aren't betraying your family when you set a boundary, Corporal," I told her gently. "You are teaching them how to respect you, and more importantly, you are respecting yourself." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "But the guilt? It feels like I'm breaking a sacred rule. They're my family." "I know," I said, my voice soft. "We take an oath to uphold certain values. We know them by heart." I leaned in, making sure she heard every word. Honor, courage, commitment. Those values apply to protecting yourself too. Your honor is worth defending. Having the courage to say no is a battlefield victory. And your primary commitment must be to your own well-being, because a soldier who is broken at home cannot be effective in the field. You are worthy of being defended. The last time I saw her, she was walking into Ms. Riley's office, a folder of her own tucked under her arm, her back just a little straighter. The final scene of my old life, and the first of my new one, took place where it began to turn around. I was walking through the High Ground Veterans Memorial Park, the same place I'd passed on my way to meet Sarah over a year ago. The Wisconsin autumn wind was crisp, rustling the leaves. I no longer felt a heavy weight when I thought of the past. The anger had faded, leaving behind the quiet wisdom of a healed scar. The memories were no longer active combat zones. They were just part of the map of my journey. I had taken the core values that had been twisted and used against me, and I had redefined them. Honor was no longer about blind obedience. It was about being true to my own integrity. Courage was no longer just about facing enemy fire. It was about having the strength to defend my own boundaries, even against the people I was supposed to love. And commitment was no longer a one-way street of sacrifice. It was a fierce dedication to the peaceful, purposeful life I was now building with my own two hands. Captain Millie Pickett had completed her final and most difficult tour of duty. She had been honorably discharged from a toxic family unit, and she had promoted herself to commander-in-chief of her own life. Thank you for walking this path with me. My war at home is over, but I know that for many of you, the battle might just be beginning. If my story has proven anything, I hope it's this. Your peace is worth fighting for, and your boundaries are worth defending. You are not disloyal for demanding respect. You are your own command. For more stories about reclaiming your power and finding your voice, please hit subscribe. And if this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, please share it. You never know whose life you might change.